Welcome to They Live by Film, a film discussion podcast focusing on the Criterion Channel and beyond. My name is Adam Lundy, and I am joined as always by my co-hosts Chris Haskell and Zach Bryant. How are you doing today, guys?
Doing good,
Hey,
doing good.
Good.
happy November.
Happy Noir-vember, I hope. Everyone will be watching plenty of noirs this November.
Yep, I've got my Columbia Noir 1 set from Indicator that I'll be going through.
Nice. There's some decent movies in that one. I have all four. I haven't watched as much from the latter two. I haven't even watched any of the latter two except for one I'd watched previously. But they're like, I'm not gonna lie, like the film quality is an absolute mixed bag. But they're at least they're fun, and the set itself is really nice.
Yeah, definitely. What about you, Zach? Are you still, is there a different genre of horror you'll be watching, or are you going to try something different?
Um, it's one of those deals where I feel like I watch so many movies in October. I'm a little burned out, and I'm like, I've barely watched anything this month. Like, I think I've watched like 4 or 5 things, including what we're talking about today.
Hey, speaking of that, I know we have to jump in, but we both had, or y'all both had goals at the beginning of the year in terms of quantity of films. How are y'all doing towards those goals?
Oh, I was just about to say I have 10 minutes or 10 minutes, 10 films to hit my 300 goal. So I'm just taking it easy now for the rest of the year because I was the same in October. I've kind of burnt myself out a bit. So like I think I've only watched maybe like, what are we on? We're on the 7th of November. I would be surprised if I've clocked more than 3 films this month so far. 4. I've watched 4 films this month so far. So I'm just kind of cooling it. I haven't watched anything this weekend. I'm just cooling it down a bit because I only have 10 to go for my target. So I'm just not going to burn myself out.
Yeah,
I'm at 333. I could hit 400, but the way I feel right now, probably not. I'll at least hit the 365, which is kind of the main thing. But
yeah, it's cool. It's good to target.
I'm at, let's see. Oh, it's not under diary on Letterboxd. Where is it under? Films.
You got to go to stats and go to your
stats. Yeah, stats, and then choose this year, and then check how many you've logged.
Yeah. I see 221. So, 284. So 16, I guess, to get to 300.
Yeah, it's a good target.
It's kind of like a loose goal for me every year. It's not like a hard, fast goal, but.
See, I was naive at the beginning of the year to say, you know what, 500 is doable. And then I was like, no, it's not.
No,
I didn't want to call you out on
it. like unless you're like unemployed or, that's the only way I can think someone can get to 500 films. Either you don't sleep or you just have nothing to do during the day.
Need to become an insomniac. That's what I'm learning.
There's a guy that I follow. He's actually super nice to me. I really like him, but he goes at a pace that it blows my mind. So this year he's registered, either rated or reviewed, 1,308 movies.
Some of those have got to be shorts, right? Like,
oh yeah, they'd have to be.
1,308, and if that's 90 minutes just on an average 90-minute movie, divide by.
Surely it's going to be at least 3 or 4 films a day.
Yeah, it's about 3. Like
that's 81 days worth of movies. 81 days.
Jesus.
Not bad. Yeah, 365 times 4 is 1,400. And that, whatever, this person's name is Tim. He's definitely on pace to hit 1,400. So it's essentially 4 films a day, right?
That's crazy.
Yeah. But, who knows? Like, retired, like, unemployed, like you said. Like,
yeah. See, the main problem I have is that there's too much choice. Like I spend more time choosing what film to watch than I do actually watching films.
Which is why we have the film club. That way we don't have to choose.
Like the thought of me having to choose 4 films to watch in a day, no, I wouldn't be able to do it. I would just waste so much time choosing in between each one.
I've had maybe 2 or 3 days this year where I've watched 4 movies, but I already knew, I knew I had the day off and I already knew exactly what I was going to watch. And that's happened like 2 times.
Yeah.
But
3 is the max.
Day, yeah.
3 is the max I've done in a day. I've done it a few times this year. I did it on Halloween. I watched 3 films on Halloween. And then a few other weekend days throughout the year I've watched 3, but I haven't watched 4 in a day.
I think it's a matter of just like waking up every day and like doing it again and again and again. I think by February or March, I would have to take a break. That's just like an amazing clip to keep that
Yeah,
up
that's
every
just that would burn me out super fast.
day.
Um,
Anyways,
cool. Well, look, we'll crack into this week's episode. Before we crack into this week's episode, just to give another quick plug to the Patreon, patreon.com/They Live by Film. There's plenty of content up there already, unedited versions of the last two podcasts, as well as October's newsletter. And November's newsletter will be posted in or around the 25th of November, give or take a couple of days. It'll be in the sort of last week of the month, and that's going to continue on every month with exclusive reviews and tips for what's going to be coming up, a few little sneak peeks and things like that as well. So if you're interested in chatting with us directly, you can comment. We're going to be doing polls next year as well. So if you want to chat with us directly, if you want to support the podcast and the website, pop on over to patreon.com. The link is in the description. So now we will actually pop into the first film of this week, which is the 1970 film. I guess we can call it a film. It's original cast album Company. It is a pseudo musical documentary by D.A. Pennebaker, probably like one of the most well-known sort of avant-garde documentarians, especially from this era in the 60s and 70s. Just to give you a sort of overview, I would say a brief overview, but it's actually not very brief. The synopsis that's on IMDb. Basically, Stephen Sondheim's musical Company opened on Broadway in the spring of 1970, and tradition dictates that the cast recording is done on the first Sunday after opening night. D.A. Pennebaker, the now legendary documentarian, filmed the production of the original cast recording, the back and forth between Sondheim and the performers, and the dynamic of trying to record a live performance. The film climaxes. I'm not going to spoil how it climaxes. Why would they have that in the IMDb description? It's a bit strange. I guess we don't have to talk about the film now. That pretty much sums it all up. I had a really tough time rating this, and you would know if you're listening and you've watched this, you probably agree. I had a hard time, rating this because it's just something on its own completely. It's not really a film. It's just sporadic shots of people performing and recording and talking about recording and performing. There's no narrative, there's no voiceover, none of the stuff you would normally see in a documentary. None of that's really here. It's just moments sort of presented over the space of 50, 60 minutes. But it was really enjoyable. I did like it. It was entertaining at the absolute very least. What did you guys think, Chris? What was your sort of thoughts on this?
Yeah, so okay, there's a lot I want to talk about here. There's so many different individual components that I think are interesting. But my internet's going really slow. So while I look it up on They Shoot Pictures, Zach, do you mind just getting started, and then I'll have the They Shoot Pictures up?
So I guess I don't want to be negative because I think it does what it wants to well. I just kind of found it a little dull because it didn't interest me. Like, I felt like if I was like really into Broadway or into musicals, like I like some musicals, but it had its fascinating points. But I'll be honest, when I just thought it felt a little like a drag to get through, even at 50. I mean, I'm glad it wasn't 2 hours because 50 minutes was kind of enough for me.
Yeah, I'm not a musical guy either. I know a lot of people in our film club are sort of into musicals and stuff, but I'm definitely not. I wasn't a big fan of the actual music itself, except for that one particular song that they do towards the end was kind of cool. But yeah, I wasn't a particular fan of the music itself. I was more so a fan of how they sort of presented them making the music, if that makes sense.
Yeah,
Chris,
I guess it feels a little unfocused, and that may have been part of it for me as well. Like, by design, it's unfocused.
Okay, actually, this might kind of be a sneaky fun discussion, but based on what y'all are saying so far, I want to lovingly challenge some of this. But They Shoot Pictures has it at 7180, so the world generally agrees with what y'all are saying. It's not, there are 7,179 movies that are rated higher than this. I don't think I did like it, so I want to say that if it wasn't Pennebaker, I don't think this movie probably would have got much attention. Um, although Company was a popular musical in its time, I don't think it's had the legs that like some of the other Sondheim musicals have had. Are y'all familiar with Sondheim at all, generally in terms of like some of the big musicals that he's associated with?
I know he exists. I know he exists, but I couldn't tell you a single musical he's done other than Company, and I didn't know Company existed until I watched this. So there you go.
And I mean, to be fair, I can only name like Andrew Weber. Like that's about all I can name.
Yeah, like West Side Story is a big one.
All right, okay.
A Funny Thing Happened on the Way to the Forum is a big one. Gypsy's a big one. Sweeney Todd's a big one.
All right, okay. Yeah.
I'm sure I'm missing a few more, but he was famous for, if Andrew Lloyd Webber was the Steven Spielberg of musicals in terms of like you generally leave his musicals feeling good. You know, Sondheim was a little bit heavier, a little darker, maybe like a little bit more of an auteur, so to speak, in that world. And I think, you know, this was intended to be a recurring segment that never happened, because this is by the time they finished this particular documentary, some of the crew, or some of the people that were leading the production of Company actually wound up, I think, did they say like leading a studio or something, like getting a job at MGM and like leading the studio or something, or anyways, but they only shot one of these, so this is supposed to be the one of you know, part one of many. And so we're getting this little kind of glimpse into American, you know, musical cinema in the 70s. Is that right? For some reason, I'm doubting myself. Was it 1980? 1970. Yeah.
1970, yeah.
So anyways, from that angle, I think it's super interesting. I used to do musicals. I don't have a great voice. I was always more like in speaking roles. Like the only thing I ever brought was I could be generally like big and loud and kind of funny. And so they put me usually in the chorus with a part that was like, I didn't have to change notes a lot. I definitely never had solo roles. But I guess there's a couple of things on display here that are maybe make this niche. But I just wanted to ask y'all a question really quick before I make my point. Have y'all seen either Jimmy Plays Monterey or what's the big one that he's
Monterey Pop.
Monterey Pop. Yeah.
Yeah.
Have y'all seen Monterey Pop?
I have, yeah. It's awesome. I
haven't. I've wanted to, but I've never watched it.
It's really good.
Okay. So Adam, what did you like about it? Because it's the same. No, I don't want. I guess you didn't critique this movie necessarily, but the points you said were kind of made you neutral on this, are the same way that he shot Monterey Pop, right?
Well, so with Monterey Pop, okay. So, well, first off, it's easier for me to like Monterey Pop because I like the music that was in Monterey Pop. So that's first off. It's easier for me to like that because, you know, it's, you know, Jimi Hendrix, Mamas and the Papas, you know, they're the kind of music. That's the kind of music I like. Mm-hmm. Musical music, showed music is not really my cup of tea. I'm not a musical guy. So first off the bat, it's easier for me to like Monterey Pop better. Monterey Pop, this is going to be weird to say because both films are structured and unstructured in the opposite ways, and I think it works better in Monterey Pop than it does in this Company, yeah, original cast album. So in original cast album, everything is super loose in terms of the actual structure. We're just shown random scenes of things happening, but everything that's happening in those is meticulous. So they're talking about people having to re-record the same song over and over and over again because maybe there was one bum note. So everything happening within these little sort of chunks of narrative are extremely meticulous and down to the fine line, and everything is sort of really put together in a very structured way. But that's shown quite loosely through the actual film. The opposite is said in Monterey Pop, which is quite structured in terms of it goes band to band. It doesn't really have weird avant-garde moments. It's very structured in how it presents it. But the music is much looser and wilder and more free. So they're the opposites. They are both structured and unstructured, but in the opposite way. And I think it works better in Monterey Pop by just showing, you know, going from band to band and segment to segment, but the music itself being wilder and freer than the opposite in original cast album, if that makes sense. It makes sense in my mind. I might not be articulating it well, but That's why I prefer Monterey Pop, because I like the music better, but also I like how I think it's presented more authentically than Cast Album, which I think is just a bunch of scenes put together. And yeah,
I think it makes a lot of sense.
Well, I was going to say, I think that's kind of where, like, I would kind of zone in and out when I watched it, and I think that's the reason is because I never felt like this cause and effect, like what Adam's kind of describing with Monterey Pop, which I haven't seen, but that kind of seems like a little bit more like a through line almost, like this idea that things happen in some type of cause and effect almost, even if it's not like it's still unstructured. With this, I just kind of felt like I could like walk out of the room for 30 minutes and I could come back and I really want to know the difference of what happens. And I think that kind of like affects me. And maybe that's a really like basic or shallow way to watch something, but it just like it loses me a bit.
No, I think it's, I mean, obviously, whatever, however you feel is extremely valid. There's one more thing I want to, before I make my kind of main point, there's one more thing I want to say. So a year before this in Italy, NBC paid Fellini, I don't know how much money, but they said, do whatever you want. And they actually called it NBC Experiment in Television. And it wasn't very good. I mean, I didn't like it. It was Fellini in his most like Fellini in the sense that it was this kind of meta hour of television where he was like driving around the city and going to parties and talking about movie making. And it was kind of a documentary, but you could tell it was fictionalized and it was hard to follow. But I'm curious, I don't know the answer to this, but I'm curious if this was made a year later in 1970, at least the pilot was shot then. You know, like, was there something happening in the greater culture where these TV studios were just trying to figure out kind of like what Netflix and Prime are doing now? Like, how do we keep eyeballs on our channels, right? Like, what are the things we need to do, like, to kind of mix up like TV a little bit? And so this would have been a glimpse at a time when musical theater, I think, was talked about more. Like, in a regular conversation, I don't think most people talk about musical theater much nowadays, right? Unless you happen to be in that world. Or like seek it out, but you wouldn't go from a conversation to like the Patriots to then the new production of Avenue Q after, or like the new Lin-Manuel Miranda production, like those typically you don't talk. It's not like in the cultural kind of vocabulary the same way that it would have been still in the 60s. So I think this would have been a relevant thing to see, like behind the scenes of a show that everybody kind of was excited about. It was the new thing from Sondheim. They probably marketed West Side Story pretty heavily as like from the maker of, you know, whatever, like come get a glimpse of how hard these people work to make this thing run for you 8 times a week or, you know, whatever. So I'm just imagining kind of like what was going on at that time. And I bet you this probably would have captured a lot of eyeballs. Like I bet you people would have sat down and watched an hour of this.
Could be talking like just completely out of my ass here, but anytime things like for like the 70s, my first thought is just counterculture movement. You know, this is right at the end of that. There's a lot of focus on art. There's a lot of focus on artists themselves. And I could see that kind of playing a part in it. Like I said, I'm guessing, but I could, you know, anything with the 70s, you can almost always say it has something to do with counterculture.
Yeah. Yeah, totally. And there's a lot, you know, the lyrics are fairly subversive. I don't know how much y'all paid attention to the lyrics, but they get really raw. Like this particular musical gets really raw into like the dysfunctional relationships, and it's probably a little bit more honest and like raw than most, you know, kind of musicals were being at that time about some of the difficulties in a relationship. So that was probably interesting as well. And you got to kind of watch. It's almost like, you know, I think there's a little bit of intrigue. Do y'all remember the first time that you sat down and like watched the people recording the voices to The Simpsons and just thought how cool that was, like to kind of see like, you know, Marge and like Bart didn't, you know, Bart was a woman and like, I don't know, like all those things.
Yeah, I guess the one example I'll use, like Harry Shearer was probably always one of my favorites to watch because he would do Mr. Burns and Smithers in a conversation form. He could go back and forth and do it. And I think it's incredibly fascinating, even though that's off topic. I just think that.
No, but like here's the thing: you love The Simpsons, right? And so like that was interesting. Adam, you could watch 4 hours of Monterey Pop because you love the music, right? Like, I think this was probably not made to be generalized. I think this was probably made for people that love musical theater, and like, here's a chance to see behind the scenes of like how amazing these people are. Like, sometimes they even hit all the notes, but it was like, could you just do it with a little bit more life? Like, what kind of a direction is that? But when the take was right, like that was the take. It was kind of like stamped for immortality, right? So they had to get it just right, even if it meant 18 hours or whatever of recording.
But if
and I think that's a good point. Yeah.
Sorry. Yeah.
No, I was just gonna say, I think it's a good point. And I think if I was a drama kid, I would love something like this. I know we have somebody in our group who particularly really likes like musical documentaries. This is right up there, that sort of alley, if you are into that. I'm kind of curious what the one person in our group gave it who was not into music. I didn't look, but I'd be curious to see that. But yeah, I think that's a great point. I think I would have liked it a lot more if that was the case.
If we compare it on the point of musical documentaries, if we compare it to a film that we watched and discussed on this podcast, which actually came out the same year, Give Me Shelter, by the Maisels, like we can probably safely assume the same people that were going to Rolling Stones concerts and the people who are going to Sondheim musicals, there's probably not a lot of overlap in those groups, especially maybe nowadays, yes, but in 1970, there probably wasn't a lot of overlap. So we have two sort of documentarians, the Maisel brothers, and then Pennebaker, sort of known for their indirect form of documentary, very sort of avant-garde filmmakers from a documentary point of view, at least. And on the same year, they released these two films that are largely sort of loose or unstructured, but about very different sort of musical worlds. So obviously the Rolling Stones fans would love Give Me a Shelter. So this kind of gives something for the people who are more into musicals, as Chris was saying. So it's the same kind of idea, just giving a glimpse into the behind the scenes, just in a sort of
niche,
kitschy way.
Yeah.
I mean, also America has a weird, like, I don't know, Adam, have you ever seen the Macy's Thanksgiving Day Parade?
I know it exists because of sitcoms, but I don't actually know what it is or, yeah.
That's okay, Adam. I've never watched it either.
Wow, it's so boring. Like, it's just like 3 hours or whatever, I don't know, of like a camera, like let's say they set up like 20 cameras, I don't know, whatever. And they just cut between different cameras and like there's like these slow kind of parades moving through the city, right? And like these slow kind of floats moving through the city. But like, I mean, millions of people watch that. But I think I don't know, people watch TV for like so many different reasons. This is probably just trying to capture eyeballs. And the only other thing I'll say is that unlike rock or the stuff that was being shown, R&B, rock, kind of the stuff at maybe Monterey Pop or some of the other music at that time, this isn't like there's like a perfection to this, like the craft is different. I'm not saying that, like, obviously Jimi Hendrix is like an amazing guitarist, right, if not the best ever. I'm not saying that you can't compare quality or anything like that, but like to get so many people working in unison and to have to get it perfect, and the orchestra hitting all their notes and getting their notes perfect, like it's like this massive feat, right? And to do it live 8 times a week is hard enough. And I think that this probably just gives an interesting glimpse to what's actually happening in a way that people probably hadn't seen too much before. I don't know if there's too much else to say about the movie. I guess I'm kind of saying the same thing in different ways. But it was entertaining for me, somebody who was from that world. I don't think I could have watched 3 hours of this, but if it was another half an hour, I could have watched Elaine Stritch try to figure it out a little bit longer. She was such an enigmatic character. She was the closest thing to a storyline, I guess, right?
Closest to what?
She had the closest thing to a storyline, I guess, right?
Yeah, I would say so. Yeah. There's like a through line to follow.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, that was a really great sequence. Like I kind of drifted in and out a lot of it, going, "Oh, this is cool," and then zoning out, and then, "Oh yeah, that's cool." But that kept my attention. That whole sort of segment with her doing that song about people. What was it? People who dine or something like that. Was it people who go to dinner or something along those lines?
It was
that
crazy.
sequence kept me.
I guess for me, it kind of begs the question, because this is, I'll use the word experimental here just because it's not like how you would stand, like the standard way we're kind of used to with a lot of documentaries. It's different than Gimme Shelter, that, has a bit of a story to it, even if we're doing sort of similar things. But
Sure.
I guess for me, I guess I wonder, and this isn't like me having an answer or anything, if it's better to be experimental and kind of go towards a niche audience, or to do something more standard and maybe attract more people. I don't know which is honestly better. I guess for me, I would still prefer the more experimental route, even if I don't quite understand it. But that's just because I think it makes it more memorable.
Yeah. I mean, this is really straightforward, right? I don't know that there's really much to pick apart here. We saw it. It was interesting. I don't know what else to say, honestly, about this.
It's definitely a movie.
It's not a feature-length one, though. It didn't make it to 60 minutes.
No.
Yeah.
It is a short film. Barely.
That's a good point.
So I guess what would this be our second short that we've done on here, right? Because we did Black Panthers.
Yeah,
but that was only like
Panthers.
half an hour.
Yeah, I don't think we did any other shorts. And even, I don't know, I feel bad calling this a short film, because
it just
I know.
I just know with the American Film Institute, I know they have a requirement. It's got to be 60 minutes to be considered a feature film.
Yeah. Okay. And what was this, like 58 or something, was it?
Yeah, it's like 50. I think it was 54. I think 54 minutes is where 54. It cut off for me.
Damn. If only he had cobbled together a few more scenes of people
6 more minutes
doing vocal warm-ups or whatever.
Did any of y'all see the spoof, the documentary Now?
Oh, I love documentary Now, but I've not seen that.
No.
Okay. Yeah, I haven't either. I was curious to see it.
If you're gonna watch documentary Now, watch the one called Batshit Valley.
Okay.
That one's fantastic. It has like Michael Keaton and Owen Wilson and everybody in it, and it's great. It's funny.
What are they mocking? Do you know?
Basically the Jonestown documentaries.
Okay.
But it's very lighthearted. It doesn't take itself very seriously. It's worth watching. It's like 2 parts.
Nice. Great. Okay, so original cast album in the books. I'm very excited to introduce and talk to Rob Sweeney this week. So Rob is probably has one of the jobs that would be my dream job, which is he's responsible for the production of physical media for Kino Lorber for particular. So there's sort of like 3 Robs within the company. He has a particular set of releases that he's in charge of. Really gracious guy as we set up the time. Went over a lot of time, and I really enjoyed this discussion. I think he has a fascinating job, and it blew my mind that each of the 3 heads of production each do 10 to 15 releases a month for Kino. I didn't realize the volume was that high. That their schedule of releases is just crazy. So I was very happy he took time out to talk to us, and hope you all enjoy it. Rob, thanks so much for joining today. For those who are kind of listening to this is Rob Sweeney from Kino Lorber. Rob, would it be okay? I know we were exchanging messages and stuff, but would it be okay if you describe just very briefly what you do for Kino?
Sure. Yeah. I'm one of the producers of our physical media, DVD and Blu-ray. I handle a lot of the Kino Lorber titles and Kino Classics titles. So a lot of the theatrical films that come out on home video, and some of the, silence and other things come my way as well. So that's basically what I spend my days doing, is getting all these discs out. I was excited when you kind of relayed some of that to me over email, because my very first Kino purchase back in 2001, 2002 was Die Nibelungen. Yeah. And it's a big, thick, double disc DVD. And then there's been at least 2, if not 3, editions of Metropolis over the years. Yes, that's the old standard. Yeah, we have a long running relationship with the FW Murnau Foundation, and so we've been able to license a lot of the restorations they do. Yeah, Metropolis has been one of our cornerstone films. And then when they discovered that additional footage, that was quite a miracle. So
Yeah.
yeah, we've released it many times in different ways.
Well, it seems like a lot of labels have, like Blue Underground has a few titles, like Maniac and Maniac Cop, a few titles that they put out in every every generation of technology. And Grindhouse Releasing has, so many of those kind of horror films as well. So it feels like there's a few of those titles that have kind of tracked well along with you all over the years. But I know that the rights are kind of interesting because typically the rights for physical media is about 7 years, right? Depending on how you buy it. So are there different types of deals, or are y'all just renewing, or are you not allowed to talk about it, which is fine as well, of course?
Yeah, well, I would just say that each deal is different. Each relationship is different with every licensor, and so yeah, it kind of comes on a case by case basis. But there's a lot of long running relationships that we have and hope to continue to have.
Yeah, that's great. So, how long have you been in this role right now?
I think it's been a while. Oh man, I think it's been since like 2014, so it's like 7 years.
Okay, great. That's a good lead into my question. So that you have a historical kind of perspective here of what it was like before the pandemic and then kind of afterwards. The biggest thing we hear. I'm pretty active on Reddit. In the boutique Blu-ray community. I don't know if you ever venture on there. But one of the big things that people talk about is this idea of like production delays really being kind of exacerbated during the pandemic. So, I guess to the extent that you can talk about it, like at a high level, has that impacted y'all as well? Or do you have some workarounds? Has that not been as big of a deal for you?
I mean, essentially, we've had to keep pushing back our production schedule so we get things completed further and further in advance. Yeah, when I first started, the turnaround was much faster. Essentially, it's just changed our schedule. So now I have to build in a few more weeks, sometimes a month, so I can get something done. Whereas previously, things would have turned around within a week. So yeah, it's definitely affected the workflow in that sense since I started.
That's a novel concept. So you just plan for the delays; they don't impact you as much.
Well, yeah, you try to do that. It doesn't always work.
Yeah.
But yeah, that's the idea anyway. Because the turnaround time, it does become standardized after a while, and instead of complaining about it, like this is the new reality sometimes. So you just have to roll with the punches as they come.
Yeah, for sure. You mentioned theatrical releases. So one of the ones that I was excited about in the note you sent me was Bacurau.
Yes.
That's one that you worked on, right? Did I get that right?
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, that was a big one. That was a movie that was going to have a very successful theatrical run. And that had only been out for a week or so when the pandemic hit. It was like that weekend.
Okay.
So that really got crushed. And yeah, I worked with the director, Kleber Mendonça Filho. I'm sure I'm pronouncing that wrong. He's very invested in home video. And so I was dealing with him directly on getting a lot of good stuff together on that one and getting the making of, an hour-long making of that he directed, and getting him to record an audio commentary from his home when he was on lockdown. Yeah, so that was quite a lot of work on that release.
It's a fantastic film. It kind of is a throwback in a way to, I don't know, maybe like a John Carpenter type of film, or one of those where it's a very heavy genre film, and Udo Kier is in it, which is always a nice touch.
Oh yeah, Kleber is a huge John Carpenter fan. I think that he often names him as one of his favorite directors. And he's coming from more of an art house background. He was a film critic initially, and his first few films are the Neighboring Sounds and Aquarius are kind of more novelistic and engrossing. And this one definitely he pulls more from his interest in genre. Yeah, it's a lot of fun. if people haven't seen it, it's like basically it's also kind of has a Western feel. This town is being invaded by Westerners who are hunting them for sport. So it has a most dangerous game element too, and they band together and fight them off. And it also it's very violent, very fun, very it's kind of a special movie.
Yeah, no, I loved it. That was a great surprise, I guess, so to speak, to see that's one of the ones you've been working on. Do you have a hand in the curation of it as well, or do you get a list and kind of saying like these are the ones that are coming out, and help help us get it out?
For the most part, it's things that are handed to me based on the schedule, based on the windows. So if a movie comes out in theaters and then needs to be turned around in physical in these increasingly shortening windows, whether it's 45 or 60 days, that's locked in and I have to get it out at that time. There are other things which I help to push through, like we recently put out the Ken Jacobs collection. It's an avant-garde filmmaker, and I, helped push that deal through and made it happen and got it out. So sometimes I can help to curate. And again, as with most things, boring answer, case by case basis. But I guess I would say both.
That just brings up, one of the most common questions people have when we've been very fortunate to have a few people on, or maybe let's call it restoration specialists or people on the curation side, on the marketing side, and now we're feel very lucky to speak to you on the production side. One of the most common questions that comes up is, how do you get into this role? Like, so if you were to talk to somebody who's, I don't know, 15, 16 or 39 like me, whatever, if you're talking, and they have an end state goal of kind of being in a role like you're in, is there a common path? Is there a clean path? Or is it, like, what would you say? What's a way to get into the game?
It's a tough question because it's kind of an unusual job that there isn't a regular path towards. I got through it because I started at Kino Lorber in a QC position. So
Okay.
I was basically watching every movie multiple times, from the masters to the discs, over and over again, pointing out the flaws and hoping we caught everything before it was released. And then from that I was gotten to this position, and that was after being out of school for a couple of years, and just randomly my friends who I went to school with in cinema studies had that job, and he left and I slung in there next to him. So I would say it's if you're interested in cinema, then I would keep following that path wherever it leads you. I wouldn't have this as a goal. It's a very limited position, and I don't know like how many positions there are going to be moving forward. But a good way to do that is to get into a QC position or a QC company, because that's very important. I would say, and then graphic design, editing, that can get you in the door anywhere. So it's more about getting in the door and then seeing what things open up. And I was just at the right place and never left, and then I started doing this job too. So there's various different ways, I think, to get into it.
That's great. Yeah. So I mean, I don't mean to oversimplify what you just said, but sort of be willing to put the time in to kind of be there so that you can be there when the position's open and see it first and kind of be able to jump in.
Yeah, it's the boring answer, but it really is, being at the right place at the right time and showing, that you're interested in it, because it is, more and more of a niche product these days. So if you have a passion for it, you might be able to get into it.
Well, so that, I guess that's a good kind of way to speak now from the role to just kind of Kino Lorber specifically. So I've always viewed Kino Lorber as a boutique house. And the way that I kind of differentiate that in my head, at least, is, are you producing your own content as far as like a studio would be concerned, or are you licensing content from rights holders or studios and then putting out, your own kind of unique releases on top of that, somebody else's content, I guess, so to speak. How does that match with how you see Kino and I guess how Kino sees themselves? Is that a fair representation?
I would say that's a part of the company. Is the home video is a boutique physical media distributor. Yeah, I think that's fair to say. But I mean, there's also many other arms of the company because, we're distributing new releases theatrically. We have a, big educational department and VOD, and the digital is doing amazing things. So I would say, yeah, we have a home video department that I think is accurate to say is, in that boutique space, that collector space, but that it's just one part of the company.
No, that's a great, fair answer. The thing that's always impressed me about y'all is that if you look at some of the ones, like Vinegar Syndrome has all these new partner labels that are kind of, they've announced, and they do maybe a release a month, right? Sometimes a release every 3 months, depending on if it's just one person manning shop and trying to put out what they can. But Kino's up in that stratosphere with some other companies that are able to do, it feels like whatever you want. Like if there's some months where there's 10, some months where there's maybe 20, and then there's box sets thrown in there. I feel like your job would get pretty intense at times.
Oh, it's quite intense. Yeah, I mean, I do like 15 plus releases a month, and then Kino Lorber Studio Classics, which is led by Frank Tarzi. I mean, they do even more. They do like 20, 30 a month. It's quite a pace, and I think we do a good job to still keep the quality high, and it's just a different way to go about it. And I think the benefits of it is that you get more kinds of movies out there when you have this kind of approach where you're distributing quantity in addition to quality. So, things like 13 Washington Square, it's kind of an obscure universal silence, but because we're able to license so many titles, we're able to justify getting it out there. Whereas if we had to do more of a curated thing, it probably wouldn't make the list. So yeah, I'm really proud of the diversity and variety across, the history of cinema from all over the world. I think we do a great job of that.
No, that's actually that's a perfect lead in. So, I've just as a personal interest, I like to do like a director run. So I'll kind of start for, like the Kurosawa, the Fellinis, the like Sam Fuller's, like a lot of these folks, Wong Kar-wai, like I'll try to go through and find and buy their whole like filmography. And then just go through them slowly. And every single director that I've done this with now, I've either finished or started doing this with probably like 8 different directors, and there's at least one, if not several, Kino Lorber titles in. So it's sometimes it's a little bit more of an obscure film from a well-known director. Sometimes it's whole big box sets, and so it just, no matter what, it feels like y'all are sort of very omnipresent almost in the space of world and in classic cinema. So I agree to your point. I guess from a collector standpoint, I fully agree with what you say.
I just think, yeah, we provide a different kind of thing, some more rare stuff, some unusual stuff. Yeah, I mean, I love all the other labels and the care and attention to detail and the big booklets and all that. But yeah, I think we are also sort of an essential service of getting stuff out there.
Well, the big name of the game is restoration, right? And so all these movies that are now being just essentially preserved beyond just a film copy is extremely important too, from a historical standpoint.
I mean, I would say that's more up to the archives and the museums, because things are changing so fast that I would feel much safer if a film negative housed in MoMA than a DVD or Blu-ray. for personally, I love having the DVDs and Blu-rays for me, but in terms of like the scope of film history, that's the work of the archives and the museums and all that, because they have the facilities to keep these original elements pristine for until we're dead.
Yeah. Well, I guess, there's to that point, it's kind of a symbiotic relationship, I think, between the people that want to preserve the films and then any kind of commercial market for them, right? Which is where y'all fit in, I think, really well.
Yes. Yeah, exactly. Like we're trying to get these out there to keep this kind of history alive. And we're grateful to all of the the archives and MoMA and Anthology, and also the studios who often and Frank Tarzi does a lot of for Kino's Lorber Studio Classics, does a lot of new scans of titles to get titles back out into circulation. So we do a lot of our own original scans and restorations as well, in addition to just licensing ones that were done outside. So it's a cornucopia of
it's fun. It's a fun sort of, if you think about like I was mentioning earlier, we've been speaking with people that are more focused on like the technical restoration side and the marketing side, you on the production side. Like you kind of need so many different pieces, right, to keep this machine running. So
it's the hundreds of people and like whose hands it goes through before you can put the disc in your hand.
So I think, it's funny, this answer's been pretty much the same whenever I ask it, but if you weren't doing this, what would you do?
Lord knows. I mean, I was trying to be a film critic, film writer, and I still am. But maybe I would devote more time to doing that, even though, to be honest, it would be impossible to make a living at that right now. But if that was my goal, I was like, went to grad school for cinema studies, interned at the Village Voice, and I'd still write as much as I can. So if I didn't do this job, I probably would have been on that kind of path. Where that would have led me, I don't know. I would have had to get a day job at some point, because the nature of the business is so dire. But yeah, I couldn't say. But maybe as a writer, maybe I would have gotten into programming. Maybe I would have gone back to school, been a teacher. Like any one of those things could have happened.
Well, there's especially with a background in cinema studies, that could be interesting. And that's the one thing that I love movies, and I've watched very many, typically around 300 a year, somewhere in that range. But I don't have a classical background, so sometimes I feel like I'm missing out on some of the stuff I should catch, especially when watching some of the silent stuff that where a lot of the techniques that were developed and stuff. It's just more about kind of watching it, but for me anyways. But so this, one of the questions we ask, and it might be different asking companies as large and established as Kino, but what does it look like in the future? Like, are you seeing any trends? You mentioned that digital is really kind of doing great for y'all. Education, I'm sure, will always be strong, especially with the relationships that y'all have there. Do you see any changes coming to the physical media space, home video space? I guess one of the reasons I ask is that it feels like, because I've been collecting for so long now, like I felt like there was a dip, kind of, let's call it 2011, 12, 13, in that range. And I don't know when exactly it started getting good again, but I feel like for sure in the last 2 to 3 years, it feels like there's more releases, there's more special editions, there's more, like y'all put out that great set about Yiddish cinema recently. Like I feel like there's some titles coming out that maybe wouldn't have seen the light of day in the last 10, 15 years that all of a sudden there's bandwidth for. So are you seeing that resurgence, or is that more just me seeing what I want to see?
I don't know if it was a resurgence, but yeah, I mean, there's been a steady growth, and I think a lot of the credit, should go to Frank Tarzi, because he's developed, strong relationships with the studios to license a lot of stuff for the Kino Lorber Studio Classics line, which has been a huge success for us. And you mentioned the Yiddish cinema line that was spearheaded by Brett Wood, who is and also does a lot of production type stuff as well. And he's a great producer, and he's been at Kino for a long time. But yeah, sorry, I got off track. I just want to make sure everybody gets their credit. Because yeah, and Brett is also spearheading. We just launched an advertiser-supported streaming channel called Kino Cult.
Yeah.
And that was spearheaded by Brett Wood as well. So a lot of like great cult movies for free you can watch streaming, with commercial breaks, but the price is right. So that's another thing he's working on. And we're always talking about, different kinds of movies to release, always discussing with places to license new stuff. And it seems like the number of titles is not dissipating. The interest is still high. The customers are still really excited for the stuff we're putting out.
I'm glad to hear that the number of titles is not dissipating, as you said. That's good. We certainly, it feels to me like, I was joking with somebody the other day that a lot of those old Anchor Bay like limited editions from back in the 2003, 2004 were like 50,000 titles, 90,000 titles, when they put out like Evil Dead. I don't know if we're going to see that again, but
no, we won't.
Yeah. But it does seem like, one of the labels that I collect is Vinegar Syndrome, and they have a line called the Archive line, which is just kind of highly curated titles, and they only have 16 of them right now. And even over the course of these 16 titles, it went from 1,000 or 1,200 was the first limited, like numbered limited edition. Mm-hmm. And the one that just came out was 5,000. And I was asking somebody from Vinegar about that, and they were like, well, they keep selling out really fast. So we kind of increased that number a little bit and just kind of test it, But anyways, it feels like there's still a market for some of these limited releases and sales, like right now, sales and a lot of that. So that's good.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, Vinegar Syndrome does great work, and I'm glad they're doing well. The more the merrier.
Look, we want to bring people on from places where we buy, right? I bought a lot of Kino Lorber. I'm current on y'all's film noir sets. I hope you have a bunch more. I'm current on your Western classic sets. There's a fantastic Buster Keaton short set that really like meticulously put together. Very, very beautiful set. So I'm a huge fan of the company, and I wanted just a chance to meet and talk to somebody who's been integral in kind of making and producing these discs. One, I guess, kind of question is what am I not asking, or what do people not know about your job that you think would be interesting if they knew, whether it's challenges or stuff that maybe we just don't think about when we go buy it off the shelf or, online somewhere.
Mm-hmm. I don't know if there's anything that is actually interesting. It's a lot of emails and waiting and hoping things get done in time. It's a lot of hoping and praying, I would say.
Nice job.
Yeah, I mean, sometimes there's fun things, like we were able to connect Bertrand Tavernier with Walter Hill before Tavernier passed. Walter Hill did an intro for The Clockmaker of St. Paul on that Blu-ray we released, and they had known each other previously, but they reconnected for that bonus feature, and Heather Buckley helped me get them together. And then soon after that, Tavernier passed away. And so that was kind of one of the things I was not happy, but I was glad that they were able to reconnect before he passed on. So just I guess I would say the people you meet sometimes, perhaps not during the pandemic when you couldn't meet anybody, but right. I would say the people you're able to meet can be a particular highlight. Bertrand Tavernier was extremely sweet. Kleber was extremely open and nice. And that was one thing about the pandemic, was you're so disconnected from the people that was kind of a bummer. And if you're interested in like the nitty gritty of the stuff, I wrote an article for Filmmaker Magazine about producing DVDs and Blu-rays during the pandemic. So I wrote that as RM at Sweeney at Filmmaker Magazine. If you're curious of what my boring day-to-day is like.
Might be only boring because it is your day-to-day. I think for a lot of people, it's super interesting. So if you could send me that, or I'll try to find it, and definitely link it, and I'll read it. Yeah, I mean,
sure. Yeah, I'll email it to you. I guess one of the more fun things is generating ideas for bonus features and trying to match people to films to do audio commentaries, and then seeing what they come up with.
Is that like a series of discussions? Like that's actually a super interesting topic, because sometimes there's a direct connection, right? Like the cinematographer, director,
sure,
whatever. But sometimes it's like a critic, and I don't, it doesn't seem like there's an obvious connection other than they happen to know a lot about maybe Japanese cinema or whatever, or German cinema, German expressionism, whatever, right? But is there like, what is that process like when you're selecting somebody for that?
Yeah, it's like a balance between the person who has the most expertise versus the person who actually knows how to record an audio commentary, and will deliver it at a time and date that you can get it on the disc. Because sometimes those two things don't go hand in hand. Okay. Sometimes people who are have the most knowledge about things aren't the most timely or or technologically savvy. So so that's part of it. And then once you work with somebody who delivers something that's of a high quality on time, you're like, well, I'm going to want to work with them more and more. So that happens too. But usually I'm looking for, the person who wrote the book on the subject, and then try and see if they can do it. But if they can't, then you move on, and you go down a list and see what happens. So yeah, and each project has its individual challenges and everything.
Without naming names, have you ever got one back and you're like, I can't use that, it's really boring or just really bad or something?
No, I mean we've used what we've gotten for the most part. Like I've never entirely rejected. I remember one time, I didn't work on this one, but like Kelly Reichert for Old Joy, her audio commentary, she like stopped after like 45 minutes and just she said all she had to say. And so that was all we included.
Okay.
You take what you can get sometimes. So yeah, I mean, there's always challenges editing those things sometimes, and you don't want people like bad mouthing other people on these tracks or anything like that. But no, I haven't had any. I've never had to totally trash anything.
That's good.
Thankfully.
Yeah, seriously. I remember the old South Park DVDs that came out when they were still running, like in the early 2000s. They had this little thing called mini commentaries. And I guess they just basically those guys have short attention spans. And so they would just say like 3 or 4 minutes into the episode, they're like, I think that's all the stories we have for this one. I mean, anything else, Matt? They're like, nope. And so like sometimes that method works too. They were still interesting, even when they were short. If the stories are good, that's all that counts, I guess, right?
Yeah, I miss the days when you could get, some of the big names to do commentaries, and they were totally insane. The Val Kilmer commentary for Spartan is incredible. All of the Adam McKay commentaries on his films are amazing. And Anchorman, they have Lou Rawls show up for some reason. And I remember on Step Brothers, Baron Davis shows up. So yeah, but those days are long gone. Now we have academics and stuff, and that's okay because they know a lot. The most stressful one, I have to say, is we released this Grace Jones documentary, and coordinated her recording at a studio in London, remotely. And, she has all these requirements, and the dates keep changing, and there's only so much I can do from my office in New York, and but she got there and she recorded it, and she's like, and they're drinking like champagne in the studio and stuff, and it's a lot of fun to listen to. That one was probably one of the better ones that we put out. It was super fun, but it was super stressful just trying to coordinate getting a big star like that into the recording studio. It's not.
And you had like a writer that went with it.
Yeah, this famous writer. Not thankfully, we didn't have to get her oysters. And I remember the writer that went viral on Twitter said like, you don't have to shuck them because Grace shucks her own oysters. So that wasn't included on this one, thankfully. I don't think we would have the budget for it.
That's really funny. Well, I think that's all the questions I have. I mean, it's super interesting to hear your perspective. Yeah, I'm sure there's going to be a million other questions once we post this that people have that I forgot to ask. So if you're open to it, I might send you those over email and give a response.
Sure, no problem.
Cool. Well, yeah, thank you so much. One final thing we always ask is, maybe, I don't know whether it's once a year or whatever, like as some more titles come out that you're kind of responsible for, if you're reopen to coming back and just seeing how you've been doing and some of how the new releases have been performing.
Sure.
Great. Wonderful. Well, yeah, until we speak again, thanks again for joining.
All right. Thanks for having me.
All right. And welcome back. Now we're going to be talking about Duloc 10C, also known as the English title Fallen Angels, which was directed by Wong Kar-wai. I knew I knew how to say it, and I was still going to mess it up. This one's about this Hong Kong set crime drama follows the lives of a hitman hoping to get out of the business and his elusive female partner. Good enough, I guess, for IMDb title. I know Adam has seen this. This is his second time through. Chris, was this your first, or have you seen it as well?
This is one of the ones I'd seen about 20 years ago. I don't have a strong memory of it. It did bring up some memories for me, but honestly, I didn't remember a lot of this. Just real quick before we jump in, so They Shoot Pictures has it at 1423. So it's a beloved movie, coming just a few years after I guess arguably his most beloved movie, but I know that's people that would argue for In the Mood for Love. But just a few years after Chungking Express, which is 194 on They Shoot Pictures. So bit of a drop if you think of it that way, but it's still a beloved movie. 193 is too low?
193 is too low for Chungking Express. Although In the Mood for Love, I think, is way higher. I think In the Mood for Love is probably in the top 50.
Yeah. I know that In the Mood for Love has a lot of sort of international
it's a pretty 50-50 split between fans, I think, between Chungking and In the Mood for Love. They're both amazing pictures.
42.
42, yeah, I knew it was high.
But it doesn't have the mamas and the papas, I'm assuming. I haven't seen it, so I mean.
It doesn't. You're correct in your assumptions, Zach. It does not have California Dreamin' 75 times throughout its runtime. So you are correct. And it also does not feature a Cantonese cover of Dreams by Cranberries like Chungking Express does. So
that's just disappointing.
Yeah.
Honestly, they should just switch places just for those facts alone.
So Fallen Angels, I'll sort of dip in first if you don't mind it on this one. So Wong Kar-wai is one of my favorite filmmakers. I love stuff. I always try and watch his films a couple of times. I've seen Chungking Express 3 times, In the Mood for Love twice. So I was looking forward to sort of seeing this second time. I watched this one originally sort of relatively close after I first watched Chungking Express because if you're not familiar, if you're a listener and you're not too familiar, Fallen Angels was the plot of Fallen Angels was originally supposed to be part of Chungking Express. So it was supposed to be the third story in Chungking Express. And then Wong Kar-wai decided that it worked better with just the 2 stories and then sort of went about sort of expanding this into its own feature. So, I kind of watched this one straight after Chungking Express, expecting something very similar. And in a way, it is extremely similar in terms of the visuals and it's very visceral. But this is much sort of moodier, it's darker, it's more, it's a bit more avant-garde in terms of how the story is actually told. It's not a simple split of part 1, part 2, like in Chungking Express. And I honestly didn't really like it the first time I watched it. I think I gave it maybe like a 3 star on Letterboxd. I wasn't really, well, yeah, I wasn't too fussed about it. I thought it was very it sort of pushed me away a lot. I didn't find it very appetizing. So but I knew maybe that there was something more that I was missing out on, because I know a lot of people had recommended this one, and one of the people in our film club even said it was his favorite Wong Kar-wai. So I wanted to give it another try at some point. So I was glad it won the poll, and yeah, I just had a complete 180 in terms of how I feel about this film. I absolutely loved it this time around. I watched the newer cut. I know some people watched the older cut. Some people watched the newer cut because both of them are on the channel. I watched the newer one just for the sake of it. I didn't notice anything particularly crazy other than a couple of scenes that were in black and white in this version that aren't in black and white in the original, but it really wasn't a big deal. But yeah, I love this film. It really drew me in. Once my expectations were set to not expect just Chungking Express 2, it just allowed me to really appreciate this film for what it is, which is just, it's just a great view of just broken, lonely people, and just them just trying to get through life. And obviously there is the little Wong Kar-wai quirks of hitmen and neon signs and blonde women, and just your typical Wong Kar-wai stuff. But yeah, it was a really emotional film as well.
Would you say, just curious, I know you said the first time you watched it, you felt like it kind of pushed you away, and you
Yeah.
brought up kind of like the loneliness factor that I noticed too when I watched it. Do you think that's kind of by design to have it push you away a bit and not have like this almost intimacy with really anything?
Yeah, for sure. Like, because obviously with Chungking Express, it's all about finding connection and then finding love and everything like that. Whereas with Fallen Angels, it's not really about that. Nobody really ends up happy, which is maybe a bit more realistic. But yeah, it's that, and then it's also everything's sort of shot at night in grimy sort of buildings and cramped hotel rooms, and it's just not as a visually or aesthetically appealing as Chungking Express is, which is absolutely by design. We're not supposed to be looking at these people living lavish lives or anything like that. So yeah, I think I just went in expecting another sort of rosy Chungking Express kind of film, when really it's not.
This one, I'll jump in this real quick, and then Chris, I'd like to hear your thoughts since it's been so long in between viewings for you. But watching this, I feel like I finally understood, because I've always heard this was one of Tarantino's like biggest inspiration as directors go, and this one I can see it a lot more than with Chungking. Honestly, like I was like, yeah, I can see where Tarantino picked up a lot of his stuff from.
I didn't know that detail. That's interesting. So he lists Wong Kar-wai as a big influencer on him.
Yeah, I think he was a big part in getting some restorations done like years ago. If I'm doing this by memory, I could be a little off, but I think this might have been one he specifically wanted restored because he saw it at a festival, and it didn't have it wasn't in the U.S. very easily, and I think he helped to bring it to the U.S.
You're saying Tarantino helped bring Fallen Angels here?
I think it was Fallen Angels. It was one of his films
cool.
that he puts as a big influence. Because he saw it at a film festival and he really liked it.
That's interesting, because Wong Kar-wai's, or maybe Christopher Doyle's camera work is so different from a Tarantino picture. Tarantino doesn't really use color the same way as like a character.
I think it's. Yeah, I wouldn't say they shoot similarly, but I guess I look more as like the subject matter and like the way comedy's used. I think comedy is kind of where I see the similarities more than the way they're shot.
Yeah, and even the characterizations as well, like the hitman character from this film could absolutely be a Tarantino character.
Oh, interesting. Okay. Like from Pulp Fiction or something, or Reservoir Dogs.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, Reservoir Dogs, exactly. He could be one of those kind of gangstery hitmen.
Because even, yeah. But I was gonna say, he even talks about like his process, like how he paid this woman to pretend to be his wife, how he bought this kid like a cone to like pretend to be his kid in a picture, and it's like, yeah, that seems like how they explain their process in a Tarantino movie.
So if it's okay if I jump, that's the perfect segue into kind of like what the lasting effect this movie's had on me. Because I think that my takeaway from this was that when Wong Kar-wai is at his best, especially or at least with Chungking and Fallen Angels, it's when he puts these funny details in that you wouldn't expect in the movie. But it really adds like depth and layers to these characters that I think is so hard to do because he does it so efficiently. Like the story that I liked better was the one about the gentleman who can't speak. His character's name was, do y'all remember off the top of your head? Ho Chimo, right? Ho.
It's the same it's the same name as someone in Chungking too, right? Like am I misremembering that?
It's the same actor as the first cop. His name was like Ho Kiwi, something like that. Same actor as the first cop in Chungking Express. The one who likes pineapples.
His character, I think his character is brilliant, and I think his character is exceptionally well crafted. Like he's so funny, and there's that one scene that jumps that really, like, I don't think I'll ever forget, where he's driving with this guy's family in the ice cream truck after he's essentially forced them all to eat like all this stolen ice cream and pay him for it, and he's like fully a criminal. But the scene is shot without any sense of, or shot very straight and very kind of like joyful. This joyful moment. Sorry.
I'll hop in while Chris is getting raided for unknown crimes.
FBI hooking up.
Yeah, no, but that character, I love that character a lot. I absolutely despised this character when I first watched the film. And I loved him this time around because I saw through his vulnerability. He is stunted emotionally, he is violent, but he is absolutely tragic. And I'm very much more enjoyed his story this time around compared to the first time, because I fucking hated him the first time around. I'm not gonna lie, he annoyed the crap out of me.
Because of how aggressive he was towards everybody?
He's just a fucking asshole. He just annoyed the crap out of me because he's such a dickhead.
And then he has these sweet kind of tender moments with his dad where he's the same person, but you can tell he really loves his dad, right?
Absolutely. Yeah. And that's what I got this time around. I didn't really catch those nuances the first time.
It's almost like, like I think in that sense that Tarantino, Wes Anderson came to mind. Again, not the way it was shot, but in Fellini does this a lot, where you have this character that's doing something mischievous or bad, but the way that the film is shot is more lighthearted and kind of playful, and you're forced to kind of sit with that in the audience, and I love that. And I could have easily watched a 2-hour movie of that character and that his relationship to his dad and his weird illegal business that he just basically like forces people to pay him for stuff. He like grabs them off the street and forces to pay him for stuff. It was, I don't know, I loved it.
I'm curious. I know Adam's answer of between this and Chungking, which one for us. Chris, which do you prefer between Chungking and Fallen Angels?
My favorite story out of the 4 is the one with Ho Chi-mo right here, with the one with the man with that can't speak. Overall, I like Chungking better because I struggled to connect with the assassin in this story. I didn't. The assassin character I thought was written well. I didn't like the way the female character was written, his manager or his partner, I think she's called.
Yeah, I do think that half is the more underdeveloped of the two. I couldn't find an answer for this because, obviously, like I said at the start, Fallen Angels stemmed from being a sort of scrapped or developed, sort of more developed version of a third act in Chungking Express. But if we're going by Chungking Express, then it has 2 parts with 2 different characters, 2 different stories. So an assumption can be made that a third part was going to be just one other story. So I'm trying to figure out which one was the one with Fallen Angel. Was it the mute one, which wouldn't really make sense because it's the same actor that played the first cop, or is it the assassin? So I'm just wondering, was like which? Because if it was the one with the assassin that was sort of new and added to this, I can kind of get why it was maybe a bit underdeveloped. But if that was the one he wanted to use and then he added in the mute character, then we're very lucky because it was a very happy accident that happened, because the assassin story, it's cool, and it's it kind of reminds me of the pineapple story. When I talk about Chungking Express, I have the pineapple story and California Dreaming story. So in pineapple story, I do kind of feel like that one's a bit underdeveloped compared to California Dreaming story, and kind of in the same way, because they both have these sort of weird sort of crime gangster undertones, obviously with the woman with the blonde wig in Chungking Express, and then another character of Blondie, which may even be the same person in Fallen Angels, who knows. But yeah, in Fallen Angels, that sort of that assassin story, which is cool, it looks cool and everything like that, but it is a little bit underdeveloped, and it's probably the least strongest of the four across the two films.
Just so you know, somebody posted on, if you go to our Criterion conversation and want to join in our weekly film club discussions, within the last hour or two, somebody posted an article that gives the answer to that. Do you want me to spoil it, or should people go there and look? And
I'm interested in people going there to look, and I'm going to go look myself now. Rather, because I was genuinely curious, because, like I was saying, well, see, I don't know, I can't really say until I look at it now, but yeah, I felt the assassin story was underdeveloped. At the same time, I thought that Chungking Express as well, but I still love that film. So
yeah. Where are we? What about you, Zach? While Adam's reading that, which one did you like better?
Are we talking about between all four, or just in this one?
I think we kind of both answered the question in our own way. I think your initial question was, which movie did we like better? But I guess however you want to.
Which I like better. I've kind of been trying to figure that out, because I've only watched both once. I haven't revisited Chungking. I've been wanting to, but I haven't. They just feel kind of like completely different moods, almost like like if I don't know, I almost feel like if I was in I'm not going to say a bad mood, but kind of in a gloomier mood, I would like Fallen Angels better. Or if I wanted something like more upbeat or happier, I would like Chungking better, because they have a lot of similarities, I guess, in the way they're shot. Like I think it's fascinating. I can't think of any example. It's been over a year since we've done Chungking, so I'm trying to remember a decent amount of it. But like the chaotic feel almost feels like, even though he's using like a lot of the same tactics and things like that, it feels different, and I can't really explain why. I just think they feel so different, even though he's doing very similar things.
Well, no, I mean, I think that was, at least my interpretation is, that was definitely intentional. I think Fallen Angels has a much more cynical kind of tone to the stories.
It's essentially, Fallen Angels is the night to Chungking Express's day. Both obviously in terms of how they're presented. Fallen Angels is pretty much all at night, and Chungking Express is all mainly shot during the day, or when it is at nighttime, it's all in the very lit up areas of Hong Kong, like near advertisement boards or in sort of bars and stuff like that. So I do definitely feel that there's an inversion, or it's a sort of night and day. It's the same city, and same sort of lonely sort of souls, so sort of wander through looking for connection, but one is sort of more cynical, more grimy, more dark, maybe more realistic, and then the other is maybe a bit more optimistic, a bit more maybe upbeat about the possibilities. Because like, even though the characters in Chungking Express, they don't always get the sort of typical Disney happy ending, they do find some kind of emotional solace, or they do get some kind of closure in their stories.
Since I'm not as familiar with him, Fallen Angel seems to be kind of one that kind of developed a cult status, from what I've kind of gathered from listening to people talk about it. Is a lot of it to do with like people kind of seeing it as a Chungking too, even if it wasn't intentional, because they feel so connected?
I honestly don't know. It's one of those ones where it's definitely it's kind of like low key really loved. Like I would almost say this probably is like its third most popular film, behind Chungking and In the Mood for Love. And I know some people might disagree with some other ones, but it is a low key, really beloved film by him. Yeah. And I don't really, I didn't get it first time I watched it. I get it now because I now love it, but I couldn't really put a pin as to say why it resonates with so many people. Maybe it is the sort of, this idea of, loneliness, want for human connection. It's such a universal theme. So maybe that's it. But I couldn't put a pin to say exactly why it is such a sort of cult beloved film.
What? That's the thing that frustrated me the most about the woman character in the assassin story, the female character in the assassin story, Charlie, right?
I couldn't tell you her name. I know the one you're talking about, though. The one who likes to get off on beds.
Wait. Yeah, exactly. Yeah, exactly. So, like, actually, that's exactly what I want to talk about. So, if you think about that, a character who would be so obsessed with somebody that she would steal essentially his possessions, right? And like sort of like lay on his bed when he wasn't there. She knew he wasn't there because she was giving him the assignments. And so she would go and live out these fantasies, go sit on his stool in the bar. Like, I feel like that character could have been given so much depth. It could have been written. That's such an interesting character. And I think there's probably a universal theme there, even if it wouldn't look exactly like that for everybody. But of obsessing over somebody who's like doesn't know you or is not interested in you or you want to have a chance to meet for whatever reason. I think that's an interesting thing to explore, and I wanted more out of that.
Yeah, like she's probably the most underdeveloped of everything, really. Like, she should have been the main character of that story rather than the hitman. Because we've all been at some point in our lives, we've all wanted someone we couldn't have. It's just that's just life. We all go through it, and we've all been there at least once. She should have been the main character of that story, rather than the hitman. Because hitman's cool, but there's only so much of him going into places and shooting people up and having little wisecracks that before it just becomes the same thing kind of over and over again. Like, he's a cool character, and I did like his scenes, but she was especially for what comes later in the film, which I won't delve into. She was very underdeveloped.
Yeah,
I find it fascinating.
No, Zach, go ahead.
I was just going to say one thing. I agree. They definitely didn't develop her as much as I would have liked either. One thing I did find interesting, and it's kind of the part that stuck with me, and it's going to sound bad, but it's for different reasons than it thinks. The part where she's on the bed, that scene, I think that's one of the ones that's actually shot in black and white. I can't remember off the top of my head. But it's interesting how he shot that so unflattering, because that's one of those scenes where you can kind of shoot that in a couple different ways if you want it to be very sexual in its own way. And then it's very unflattering. It's very wide angle. It's very from a bad angle. I'm not going to say a bad angle, but not one you would typically see. And I almost feel like that's kind of what he used it for. Yeah, it's like that, almost like that. I don't want to use the word pathetic, but that's kind of what kind of comes in. It just kind of makes it feel that way. Like, in a way that you feel bad for her. But I don't know. I think that was kind of how he was using her, just almost like in a way to explore the theme of loneliness more than develop her as a character necessarily.
Yeah, it's a good point, because it's an unflattering angle. And it's sort of maybe makes it maybe look a bit like primal in a way rather than something sensual.
Yeah, and especially if we're talking about like human connections, kind of the theme between, if we're going to compare Chungking and this, that's kind of what you were talking about, Adam.
It rings true. His entire filmography really is this human connection aspect. Anything shot in Hong Kong, at least, I can't say much about his Wuxia films. I don't know if Ip Man has a lot of trouble with human connection, but from the Grandmaster. But his Hong Kong films it's like a pretty sort of standard theme for Wong Kar-wai.
Well, it's interesting.
No, go ahead.
No, sorry. No, I was just gonna say, it's interesting you bring up kind of like the primal thing, because one thing I think that kind of rings true for both when we're talking about like human connection is like sexuality is kind of like if you're going to use a basic idea of human connection, that's about the most primal one you can come up with. It's one of the most basic, easiest to identify with. And it's interesting how he kind of uses it in very different ways, like both to have connection, but at the same time have like the loneliness we were talking about in here, as kind of a sort of through line, I guess.
Just to back up your point, she gets that. Is it a note that's delivered to her at the bar, or she finds out that basically the guy's like, leave me alone, right? Like, I don't want this to happen. and she goes back to his place and masturbates on his bed again, except this time she's like crying doing it.
Right.
And it was a nice touch because there's a lot of emotion in that scene. This is like her way of kind of saying goodbye, or anyways, there's a different emotion there than the first time. So I think there's stuff like that backs up your point pretty well.
Like, I don't think he was doing it for the sake of it. There's nothing sensual or attractive or anything about those scenes. It's not like he was doing it in a sex sells kind of way. Like, I think he did it as a point, to show this sort of loneliness. David Lynch does a very similar thing in Mulholland Drive, with one of the scenes with Naomi Watts. I don't think he was doing this to exploit, the actress or a sex sells kind of a thing. I feel like he had a point in doing it, but I still think I still wish she was better developed as a character.
I agree. I think your idea to have her as like the focal would have actually been better, because I agree with you. Like, Hitman's cool. It's very comic booky. Like, it's almost like he wanted to explore like how to put comic books to a page. But yeah, I think that would have been better.
Yeah, I think it would have maybe made that story a bit more emotionally grounding, because there's not really a whole lot to sort of ground that film. It's, random scenes of her. Most of the time she's masturbating and crying. And then there's other scenes of him shooting up people or deciding whether or not he wants to sort of be with that blonde woman. So there's not a lot to sort of ground that film. I think if they had developed her better, it would have given that segment much more gravitas. Like, when you compare it to the segments of Ho Chi Minh, they have it's just much more gravitas. There's much more to go on, much more to develop. It's largely for maybe not for the casual viewer. Maybe the casual viewer prefers the scenes of the guy shooting up people in barber shops and things like that, because it's cooler. It's Tarantino, as we said before. But maybe someone who's looking more for plot and things like that, they're gonna much prefer the mute character and his story compared to this one, which seems kind of without that sort of gravitas. It's just kind of all sizzle, no steak.
I want to look up something here. I want to change topics slightly. Is there anything else? I want to talk about Wong's career really fast, but is there anything else on that before we switch gears slightly?
No, I think I'm good.
Mm-hmm. No.
Okay. So there is, he does this interesting thing early in his career. So we talked about Chungking Express being 194, I think 193, 194, and this one being in the 1400s. Then he makes, in the medium, he makes a movie called Happy Together, which I haven't actually seen.
Yeah, that's the one I voted for, actually, funnily enough. That was the one I actually voted for, because I want to see it. It's meant to be very good. Okay,
yeah, that's good. And then a couple of years go by, and then he makes In the Mood for Love, which was the one that was 42. And then he makes a couple of short films, and then that's in 2000. And then in 2004, so 4 years later, he makes 2046, and that's rated as 870. So he's got this incredible run of like critically acclaimed films. And 2046 is also supposed to be a loose follow-up to In the Mood for Love, right?
Yeah, so you kind of have to actually go further back to even find his good run. You can't just really start at Chungking Express, because Days of Being Wild, which came out about 3 or 4 years before, is also really good. I think that's somewhere around the 300 mark from when I wrote a review on it a couple of months back.
Wow.
So that's very acclaimed. That was the first film he made with Chris Doyle, and very similar kind of aesthetic, sort of with the wide angle lenses and the moving cameras and things like that. 2046 then is kind of it's a very abstract film. It's a sort of semi sequel to both Days of Being Wild and In the Mood for Love, but only in the sense that characters from these films play a part in it. Like the main character of 2046 is the same main character of In the Mood for Love, but honestly, you could watch 2046 and you would not be any the wiser. Even with me seeing a lot of Wong's filmography after watching 2046, I'm none the wiser. It's a very abstract film. I've often said about Wong Kar-wai, he shoots very simple films, but in very interesting abstract ways. But 2046 is a very abstract film shot in a very abstract way. It's very hard to grasp. I would need to watch it 2 or 3 times to really get it. But he has like pretty much all of his films except for a couple of Wuxia ones, and then his American one, which I haven't seen, but I heard is atrocious. Pretty much everything he's made, at least in Hong Kong, seems to just be an instant classic.
That's interesting. So then he makes the same year as 2046. He makes an anthology piece with Soderbergh and Antonioni, which I have to see that. Eros.
That was The Hand, is that right? The Hand.
It looks like it's called Eros.
Oh, okay.
But yeah, it's got like an incredible cast. But then anyways, I don't want to go too much on this. My point, and then The Grandmaster. So, but my point is that he has all these projects, but he has a lot of short films, and he hasn't actually done an incredible amount of feature films. But the ones that he has done seem to all be, again, other than the Wuxia films, love seems to be at the center of everything. So he seems to have, like, most of his career, I guess, is just sort of exploring a lot of like a very different takes on love in a very like unconventional kind of sometimes dangerous, sometimes edgy, sometimes heartbreaking, but like all these different ways that people kind of love each other and find love, right?
Yeah, love, human connection, even like if you want to maybe make it a broader point, like sometimes they're not looking for romantic love per se, but some kind of emotional connection.
And then with these two specifically, then that kind of ties. I think that theme is very true in all of this, because like people love very messy in his movies, and I think it makes for a good watch. Like there's no typical kind of romantic like rhythms that you'd see in a movie before. Like this is a very messy style of love, and it's like very imperfect, and it's like there's nothing polished about it, which is, I think it makes for a good watch.
Yeah, like that's kind of, if you look at his, if we say his 3 main films, so we say Chungking Express, Fallen Angels, In the Mood for Love. So Chungking Express, first story, cop, he's still obsessed with his ex-girlfriend, and he sort of meets this hit woman, but they can't really connect really. Like they just sort of chill out together. That's about it. Second story, with Tony Leung and Faye Wong. Again, Tony Leung has been broken up with by his girlfriend. He kind of has this connection with Faye Wong, but there's nothing explicitly romantic. It's not like a rom-com or anything like that. And then obviously Fallen Angels, as we've seen, we have the hitman's sort of partner who wants to be with him, but he doesn't want to be with her. You have the mute who wants to fall in love but doesn't have the emotional maturity to really properly pursue it. And then you have In the Mood for Love, which is about 2 people who maybe fall in love. At the very least, they become connected through the fact that both of their partners have been cheating on them. So, I don't want to say that his films are necessarily about love, but they're absolutely about wanting to connect with another person emotionally. And that's from all the Wong Kar-wai films I've seen, that's always been the theme. It seems to be, like I said in my review, it's almost ironic, because if you think of Hong Kong and how dense it is in terms of population density, it's probably one of the most densely populated cities in the world, if not the most densely populated cities. Mm-hmm. But all of these films are about people who can't connect. We look at these films and they're sort of packed full of people. People share little small hotel rooms, or they share apartment buildings. Like in the Mood for Love, married couples go in and move in with other people in an apartment, and they just have one little room. There's so many. It's like you're literally never more than a meter away from another human being, but yet all their characters just can't connect, emotionally or intellectually. There's always these sort of barriers surrounding them, despite the fact that they're packed in like a can of sardines.
I love that, because especially I'm thinking of the scenes with him with his dad now, with Ho Chi-mo when he's with his dad, and there's that really kind of funny and awkward scene where his dad's trying to use the bathroom, and then he locks him in. Yeah. But they're like inches from each other. I mean, he's like taking a shit like 2 feet from his face. There just happens to be a door there.
Exactly.
But they're like, so they're completely packed on top of each other, yet that's not a requirement for connection. Yeah, I really like that point.
Yeah, they can't get each other. Like, despite the fact they literally share a bedroom, and one defecates less than a meter away from the other just by a thin door, they still can't. They just don't get each other. His dad is obviously emotionally unavailable because of what happened to his mom. He's obviously emotionally stunted over past traumas. So despite the fact that they live and share the same bed in the same small cramped little room, they can't connect. And it happens throughout all of his films. And it's one of the main reasons I want to see Happy Together, because it's actually about a romantic couple. And it'd be nice to actually see a couple talk to each other for once. Because throughout his films, they just can't seem to, they just never find a nice jigsaw piece. They just can't. It's like Wong Kar-wai presents Hong Kong as a city full of individual jigsaw pieces from a million different jigsaws. So it's like he's got a million jigsaws. He takes one piece out from each and then throws them all together, and none of them are going to fit right because they're all from different jigsaws. I may be getting way too abstract with this metaphor, but that's just the kind of best way I can put it, because you just can't get the pieces to fit. But obviously there's so many people there. Just because there's so many people doesn't mean they're all going to fit together.
Yeah.
If that
Like
makes
images.
sense. Oh, fuck.
Well, at least they weren't playing a puzzle in the movie.
Yeah, that would, if I ever see a character in a Wong Kar-wai movie doing a jigsaw puzzle, I'm renouncing all of his films.
That's so funny. That actually reminds me of this. The way you described that reminds me of this really sweet moment with his dad, where he's watching the videos that he was shooting of his dad, and it's the first time you see his dad smiling, and it's almost like his son had a voice through the video, through the camera. His son was like given a voice, and that was the thing that took to get that connection. And it was like a brief moment, but it made it really powerful. I teared up a little bit there.
And it's weird. I don't know if you guys watch Community. You Community fans?
Yeah, I've watched some of it.
Yeah, so like in season 1, Abed, the sort of character who's sort of maybe is like Asperger's or something. Never really say what exactly his condition is, but his father has a similar sort of breakthrough moment where Abed makes a short film about his parents' divorce, and his father, who was previously against him being a filmmaker, is now whole for it because his son can finally sort of communicate properly. He can express his emotions where he can't do it verbally. So maybe that's a reference to this. It's the same idea, really. Maybe that was a reference to this film.
I wouldn't doubt it, because I remember, like, it's been a long time to watch Community, but I felt like they had some like decently deep cuts about like movie references from time to time.
Yeah, they're pretty good for it. Community is probably my favorite sitcom, so I've seen every episode at least sort of 5, probably 10 times for a lot of other episodes. So yeah, they're pretty sort of spot on with their pop culture references and stuff. So yeah, I only just sort of thought about that now, and you said it, Chris, about this particular scene. I wouldn't be surprised if that was a reference. Anything more on Fallen Angels? No.
No, I just let you guys go for a bit there. I was like, they know way more about him than I do. I just let them go for it.
Yeah, no, I'm a big W car.
So I guess In the Mood for Love should be the next one I watch.
Oh yeah, for sure. That was the first one I saw, and it blew me away. And then I watched it again a couple of months back, and it's still just as good. Just don't watch the new version. Make sure you watch the original
alternate version.
Yeah, because just the colors are just fucking so good. They're just
incredible. That's the only thing I'm worried about. Like, it's like, if I really get into him and I want the box set, I'm gonna be upset.
Yeah, that's the thing. Like, I do want the box set just to own it, but I probably would never watch In the Mood for Love from the box set. I'd probably just like import the single disc or something. Because they don't have there's no region B release except for the box set.
And I don't know, is he like, was he the one who was insistent about not having both versions on the box set, or did Criterion just not want to do it?
I would be surprised if it wasn't him, because I don't see why. Like Criterion owned the rights to his films. They released the original cuts, so I think if Criterion had their way, they probably would have included both. But it was probably him. I'd be surprised if it wasn't him.
Do y'all remember that statement that he put out? It was definitely him.
Yeah, it was
I
something
can't
like,
remember.
yeah, it was something along the lines of, oh, we've something about rivers and that we're not the same man we were when we walked into the river this time, and that it was very poetic and everything like that. But basically his way of saying, you know what, fuck you, I like the films better this way.
And I struggle. Like I feel like we may have talked about this before. I can't remember.
I
but
think
like,
we definitely did during an interview or something. Yeah.
Yeah. I love the idea of like a filmmaker saying, I can do whatever I want to my movie. That's fair enough. But like the preservation part of me is like, you should make both available.
Well, that's the thing. Like, I don't think there would be no controversy if both were available in the box set, even as an extra alternative version, as a bonus feature. There would be no controversy. Nobody would be upset because they can easily, readily available watch the original. But now, obviously, Chungking Express has been out of print for a while, and then eventually, In the Mood for Love will probably go out of print, and then nobody will ever see unless you want to pay over the odds on eBay. So. Because I'll be surprised if they don't leave the channel at some point as well. I was surprised they were still on the channel. I was absolutely dead certain that the original versions would be taken off the channel once they added the new versions on, because they do that with every other film. And I think Criterion did that on purpose because they wanted to keep the originals in the box set. Wong Kar-wai probably didn't, when they did the contract up, there was probably nothing in it about what will be on the channel or not. Because if you look at every other film that's gotten a remaster from Criterion and it goes onto the channel, the original version is always removed whenever a new print becomes available, except for with Wong Kar-wai's films.
I could see that as part of the negotiations or something, saying like, look, we're going to do this box set the way you want it, but we have these other rights for blank years. Like, we give us these other rights for 3 years or whatever,
Yeah.
Like, just like, let us keep it for a while because people really want to see the old version.
Cool. So we're coming into the last segment of our podcast, which as always is any other business. Just a time for us to plug something that we saw recently. Doesn't have to be on Criterion. It doesn't have to be good. You guys know the spiel. I say the same thing every week. Who wants to go first with any other business? I always go first, so I'm not going to go first on purpose this time. So who wants to go first with any other business?
I can tackle it first.
Cool.
I watched a movie I'd been meaning to watch. It's on, especially since, what's the company? Blue Underground did a release for Dead and Buried. They had a great release. Looked awesome. I need to buy it. Finally sat down and watched it and was really blown away by it. It's probably one of my favorite surprises of things I watched during spooky season. Essentially, it's about this town that, I feel like this is a spoiler and it's not because it happens at the very beginning of the movie, but basically they are murdering people who come into town and the sheriff can't figure out what's going on. It sounds really basic, but it's got this really intense mood to it. It really captures this New England setting. You would think it's based on a Stephen King work, just the way it is. Anyone who's a fan of Stephen King, highly recommend it because I think it really captures a small town feel in New England. One of the things I thought that was most fascinating is the very cover of it says, "From the mind who brought you Alien," which they're talking about Dan O'Bannon, where they say he's a writer of this, and he is, in the most technical sense, they sent him a script to rewrite, and he rewrote it, and they didn't use it, but they wanted to be able to use his name to advertise the film. So Dan O'Bannon literally had nothing to do with the movie because they didn't use anything he did. And I just think that's great. I think that's a hilarious tactic that actually works because now that's what you see every time, from the mind that brought you Alien. And one thing that it has really cool body horror with it. One of the things I thought was really cool is they want blood to be so surprising when it happens because there's so many blues and greens that the director even changed the backlights for cars to be purple, just so you wouldn't ever associate anything with red except for blood. It's just a fascinating little movie. They put a lot of work into it. If anyone hasn't seen it, kind of creepy little Wicker Man town sort of things, I think it's a fun watch. Ending's a little
Sounds
weird.
Groovy.
Yeah.
I liked this movie so much when I saw it a long time ago that I had an idea for a screenplay that I actually wrote. It's horrible.
I want to read it.
No, it's not. It's not good. but it was based off of a town where people had the world's longest stoplight, and they stopped people at the light, and they gave them a ticket if they ran the light, and they gave them a choice of coming to listen to a pitch of Rastafarianism or to get out of the ticket, or they gave them a ticket. And
I just really want to read this now. Please let me read this.
It's really bad. But I was fascinated at the idea of like getting people into town and then doing something with them. My script doesn't involve killing, but yeah.
Oh, and I did want to note Robert Englund is in the movie for like really small part, which, you know, if you want to see him before Freddy Krueger. and also, if you become a $10 patron, Chris will make his script available for you to read.
New patron tier coming soon. You can. I'll try and like digitize all the DVD of the short films I made when I was 17, and that can be something we'll put up as well. I have a DVD of them, but I don't know how to put them on a computer. So that'll be a new patron tier where we share the terrible things that we've created.
Oh, I have mine on a flash drive somewhere I can find.
Well, so speaking of horrible things that turned out into really good, there's, you know, we talked to two different people now we've interviewed two different people that have talked about Cat 3 films from Hong Kong. And one of my favorite Cat 3 films / maybe one of my favorite movies ever is Ricky-O, the story of Ricky. Have you all ever seen that?
Nope, I've heard you talk about it.
Yeah, it's amazing. So 88 Films just did this incredible release of it, and it came in, and I put it on, and it pretty much lived up to my memory. It's probably like a little bit more cartoonish than I had remembered in terms of like bad special effects, but it doesn't matter. I love it. I'll love that movie forever. It's amazing, and it's so bloody, so over the top gory. It's got a lot of like this guy Ricky, when he punches somebody, he punches through their skin, and they make like the body effects like kind of squishy, so it's kind of gross even when he punches in and gets a lot of guts and blood everywhere. So it's great. And then I finally finished the Freddy vs. Jason thing by watching the remake, the Friday the 13th remake. And I wish we had more time because I want to hear y'all's opinion on that. We can do it later, but I actually liked it. I thought it was a good horror movie.
The remake's actually pretty solid.
Yeah.
I don't remember I saw it when it first came out, and I don't remember not hating. I remember not hating it. Like Jason's like proper scary in it. Like, you know, he's
yeah. Derek Mears did awesome. Like he's a really good Jason.
Yeah, he's scary in that film. He's like a proper. It's not like a cartoony sort of Jason where it's like, oh, it's Jason, we better run. Like this dude will like you'll be proper shit your pants scared with this.
I will say the first 20 minutes of the remake is probably the best interpretation of Jason. Just like that first 20 minutes where he's still like in the bag head and he's like stringing up the one girl on the sleeping bag over the fire. That's awesome.
I need to rewatch it. I do need to rewatch it.
It's all before the credits. So like before the credits, they do this cool thing where it's like, oh yeah, you're watching a Jason film, but they turn up all the violence up pretty high, and it's great. Yeah, it was really a good watch.
And I won't make this tangent long, but Michael Bay, who was the producer of the movie, walked out of the original showing, which makes it better because it was too violent and it had too much nudity.
Wow,
it does have a lot of both.
I can't believe the director of Terminator thought it was too violent. That's crazy.
Don't encourage Chris.
So we'll close off with the film that I'm picking. So I think we touched on it earlier. It's Noirvember, so it's time to watch your film noirs. So I watched one that I wanted to watch for a long time. It didn't have a Region B release and it wasn't streaming anywhere. It finally came onto the channel, and it's Jacques Tournier's Out of the Past with Robert Mitchum. And you know, I've heard incredible things. It's sort of always lauded as one of, if maybe not the best film noir. It really lived up to the hype. It was absolutely incredible. Robert Mitchum plays the good guy, unlike where I'm used to seeing him in Night of the Hunter. He's the good guy in this as a sort of private detective who gets out of the business, and he's sort of hiding out in a sleepy California town, but he gets dragged back in by Kirk Douglas, who's playing a villain for once. So they kind of switch types in this. Kirk Douglas is a pretty menacing, if not short, in comparison. Like he's kind of like menacing in terms of, you know, like how much power he has, but he's not exactly physically imposing when standing next to Robert Mitchum, who kind of towers over him a bit. But Kirk Douglas is the villain. But the film is fantastic. Basically, he's trying to get him in, rope him in to do sort of one last job, but Robert Mitchum kind of figures out pretty early into the job he's being framed for something, to try and get him back for stabbing him in the back previously. I won't get too much into the plot beats because it's one of those films that has lots of nice little twists and plot changes throughout that, keeps you sort of gripped without being overly dense and confusing, like, things like what's the one? The Big Sleep, where I genuinely I don't have any idea what's happening for any sort of 5-minute period during that film. It's cool as shit, but I have no idea what happens in that movie. But this is kind of different, where you can follow it. It's kind of like Chinatown in that kind of respect, where things are happening at a fast pace, but it's still sort of easy to follow despite being twisty. But this one, like, the reason why I kind of liked it so much was the dialogue. It's really sort of poetic, but really nihilistic, and it has probably there's a line in this film, there's a kind of interchange between Robert Mitchum and the female lead, whose name has completely escaped me, that basically really kind of sums up film noir and its sort of nihilistic, fatalistic sort of views. And the exchange is, so she says to him, "I don't want to die." And he retorts, "Neither do I, baby, but if I have to, I'm going to die last." And I think that just sums up film noir for me. I thought that line was awesome. So
Hey,
Out of
Adam,
the Past, it's great.
could you do me a favor?
Yeah.
Recommend me, like, not right now, like, think it over, get you some sleep. Recommend me like 10 noir films I can watch this month. I'm
Okay.
trying to make it 10.
Yeah, I can definitely do that. I will happily build you up a little. I already know what the first sort of like 3 or 4 are going to be, even just popping into my head now, but I'll happily make you 10.
Sweet. Thank you.
Make sure you include the one that's in snow that you talked about, where it's all in snow.
Oh, that was kind of more of a Western, but that will suit you down to the ground, Zach. That was part of a little sort of collection that Criterion did last year, Western noirs.
What was the name of it?
Day of the Outlaw.
Okay. I'll
Day
add
of the
that to my
Outlaw.
watch list
It's a
regardless.
Western, but it's very much in the vein of a film noir.
Gotcha.
If that makes sense. So, but it is a Western. I wouldn't call it a straight film noir, but it definitely has a sort of same sort of fatalistic, nihilistic, black and white atmosphere that film noirs would have. But I'll definitely make you a list of 10 that I think are like of actual noirs, and then I'll throw that in as a nice little bonus if you can get your hands on it.
That wraps up this week's episode of They Live by Film. If you want to read more of our thoughts, visit theylivebyfilm.com. And you can also follow our Letterboxd, Reddit, and Instagram accounts from the links in the description. For now, take care.